Hi, and welcome to Confidential. Today I want to talk about American wines. Especially, I want to talk about Californian wines. After the last episode that I posted on the YouTube channel Confidential, the one about champagne, I realized that possibly it was a bit too long. So this time I decided to divide it in two parts. This first part I will present you the history of Californian wine. I will talk about the happenings and production techniques, grape varieties, and so on. While in the second part, I will talk about more about the regions, about the areas and the difference about the styles and the different areas in California. So first of all, a bit of history. Californian wines is not as old as you might expect. It's actually a quite young wine industry, at least compared to other regions in Europe, for example, or even in other part of New World like South Africa. It all started actually in the end of the 18th century. Between 1769 and 1824, we have the first plantings of grapes, thanks to the Franciscan Padres. We have to remember that it wasn't until the middle of 1800 that actually West Coast and East Coast were connected by the railway. Before that, you had settlements, of course, on the West Coast, and we have settlements on the East Coast. But in the middle, it was a bit Indians and so on. So then it was much more complicated to reach the West Coast of United States, because you had to circumnavigate all around the South America and Cape Horn. The Panama Channel as well came later on, so that made it quite difficult for colonization in a way. Franciscan Padres, so the Franciscan monks, like also other European countries, always the monks that are the one bringing the wine with them. Franciscan Padres arrived in California in the end of the 1700s and took with them, of course, vine grapes. At that time, the majority of the grapes planted were, of course, the one that the Franciscan had much more access to, coming also from South America, some of the majority of them, and there were, of course, it was, of course, the Criolla grapes. Modern wine history actually started in the middle of the 1800s with the first commercial property established in California. It was the Buena Vista Winery, which was established close to the city of Sonoma, so north of San Francisco, and it was actually a Hungarian-born noble, the Count Agoston Arazzaczi, to start the Buena Vista Winery. After that, they started to flourish the wine industry in the end of the 1800s until 1919, when almost everything stopped due to a bill of law, the prohibition, which started in 1919 and continued until 1933. In 1919, basically all the producers in California, not only there, but in all US, almost stopped to produce wine since it became illegal. There are some few exceptions, of course, some few producers which actually survived this period and are still owned by the same family, so we have multiple generation ownership. And they survived because they were allowed to produce wine for either sacramental purpose, so for the church basically, or for medicinal purpose. There were actually some kits at the time selling box with grape juice and a warning sign which was saying that if you will leave this grape juice in a warm room with possibly some yeast in it, it might start to ferment, so warning. After the prohibition ended, we were in a maybe tough period for US. It was in the middle of the 30s, it was economical crisis, and then after that it started in the 40s, in 43 actually, but already in the 40s, the Second World War. So it was a quite difficult period, and like every other situation when there is crisis, maybe wine, since it's a luxury product, will go a bit behind other more necessary products. So after that the prohibition stopped, it was until the 60s that actually it started to flourish again, the wine industry in California. So again, back to what I said in the beginning, it's a quite young industry. As you can see, I'm wearing, I thought it was appropriate, I'm wearing a t-shirt from a producer called Ridge, which started already in 1962, as you can read on my t-shirt. So it was one of the first mavericks which started the reborn of the wine industry in California, and is today as well one of the legend. There are several other mavericks, like for example the most known, of course, it's Robert Mondavi, which started in 1965 his own winery. After that he left the family winery, which was the Charles Krug winery. We have some different important happenings or milestones. The most important is what is called the Judgment of Paris. In 1976, Steven Spurrier, which is an English writer and wine critic and wine writer, in 1976, at the time he was established in Paris, and he had his own wine shop in Paris. And then he got to know, since he had a lot of customers from the American embassy and from the British embassy. So he came along some bottles from California, which at that time, again, it's quite, they just started in a way again to produce, so it wasn't that common as they are now. So he came along to some of Californian wine, and he was astonished. He was very impressed by the quality of the wine. So he decided to organize a tasting for French professionals. So he selected a jury with some of the most influential French professionals, like for example Aubert de Villaine from Domaine d'Armel-Conti, and at that time wine director of La Tour d'Argent, which is one of the most famous restaurants in all France, and so on. So he had a very high qualified judging panel. And he wanted to taste the American wine versus the French wines, so the counterparts from the French wine. So he selected Bordeaux blends from California, and he selected Chardonnay from California to be tasted beside Bordeaux wines, of course, for the reds, and the Chardonnay from Burgundy for the whites. But of course, like a lot of time when you do this type of tasting, you might always get that influenced by the name of the producer, and especially being a French wine professional, which are quite renowned to be quite, how can I say that, proud of their products. So he realized that if they were going to taste it open, so they knew what they got in the glass, it might affect the final judgment by seeing that actually which wine was in the glass. So I decided to serve it blind tasted. The wine present were some of the most legendary wine, at least from France, like for example the Chateau Latour and then for Bordeaux, or the Domaine Leflevre from Burgundy. It was a quite shocking result. Judgment of Paris was won actually both in the red categories and in the white categories by American wines. The red wine category was won by a producer called the Stag Sleep Wine Cellar from the Napa Valley, and the white category, so the Chardonnay, was won by Chateau Montelena, as well from the Napa Valley. So really it was a big scandal almost at the time, at least in France. They realized that maybe we have to step up our game and go back to produce the high quality wine that they can do. But this was a really big impulse for the American industry. Actually, the two wines that won, they are now, one bottle of each, they are exposed at the moment in New York, because it became really a part of the culture, and it became really the trailblazer that the American industry needed, the kick that the American industry needed. Thanks to that, in quite short time, American and California, especially wine production, increased quite a lot. Today, actually, California makes 81% of all American wine, so it's by far the biggest producer of USA, and is actually as big as the fourth producer in the world when it comes to wine. What's different between America and, or at least USA, American wine and European wine, is that in Europe we have, of course, this classification system, the AOP, now thanks to the European laws, and then, of course, the EGT and table wines. In America, they do have, of course, a classification system as well, but it's a much a quite different system than the one from that we have here in Europe. So in America we have a system called AVA, American Viticultural Area. What is the main difference between AVA and, for example, the AOP system? The AOP system in Europe gives you not only a geographical boundaries, so the wine or the grapes has to grow in these boundaries, but you have as well requirements, aging requirements, for example, or do you have vessel requirements, grape varieties that you can use, and so on. The AVA system actually doesn't give you always these parameters. AVA system covers a geographical area, but within that geographical area you are quite free to choose the grape varieties. You can decide to use oak barrel, or you can decide to use concrete vessels, stainless steel. You can age your wine 3 years, you can age your wine 6 months. It's quite open in a way. You have a lot of possibilities. There are of course exceptions, especially because they add as well to, in a way, standardize for the European market, which is a big market for US. So some exceptions are, for example, in California, since we're talking about California, that if there is a grape on the wine label, then 100% of the grape has to be in the bottle or in the wine. Something that is not like that for other regions in US. The majority has 85% max, so you can always have some extra of other grapes. Or for example, that if there is a vintage on the label, at least 85% of the stated vintage, in California at least, 85% of the stated vintage has to be the one that is on the label. So that means that if you have a 2016 wine, for example, it might be that you have 15% of wine which is older than that, or younger. The AVA system gives you, of course, an idea of different areas, but it's not as strict as, for example, the AOP system. So it's quite important when it comes to American wine, not only to know about the AVAs, but it's also quite important to know about the producer, how they do their wine, which aging requirements they have for their wine, and so on. Today in California we have 154 AVA, which are divided into different categories. So we have the regional AVAs, like for example the North Coast or the Central Coast, and then we have the counties AVA, so like for example the Sonoma County, the Napa County, and so on. And then we have the AVA themselves, like for example in the Napa County we have the Napa Valley AVA, or even more further the Calistoga AVA or the Oakville AVA, and the sub-AVAs, like for example the Ballard Canyon inside the Santa Barbara or the Santa Rita Hills AVA. So it's a pyramid system, starting from the regional, going up to the sub-AVAs in a way. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean quality, but at least it gives you a geographical requirements. So the grapes has to come from this AVA. In California, we have a lot of different varieties. Of course, the most known varieties for the white wine are Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. And after that, in order of area, we have as well Pinot Gris and Colombard, which is quite big when it comes to areal of viticulture. And when it comes to the red grapes, of course, the king is Cabernet Sauvignon, followed by the Pinot Noir grape, which gained quite a lot of popularity in the last 20 years, Merlot and Zinfandel, and then we have Syrah. What's actually happening, especially for the red grape varieties, is that since it's a big variation of climates and of soils and of, like for example in Napa Valley we have 27 different type of soils. So producers, since they have as well these free they don't have that much strings when it comes to grape varieties, they're starting to plant new grapes and start to experiment with a lot of strange grapes, or maybe grapes that you don't expect to see outside their native area. Like for example, you can find the Sangiovese or Nebbiolo from Italy, you can find Mondeuse, you can find Trousseau, you can find, of course, the Syrah is very well planted, but for example, you can find Petit Syrah or Ruby Red. So you can find a lot of different grape varieties, and the same as well for the white. Beside the grapes, California is very well known for its sustainability. It's one of the leader regions in the world, and actually sustainability goes as far back as the 70s. So already from when they started again, in a way, when the wine industry flourish again, they focus on sustainability. A lot of producers are certified organic, a lot of them are certified biodynamic and use biodynamic techniques, and there is a lot of different control bodies, like for example the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, Certified Sustainable Green Business Program, and so on. So big focus on sustainability, big focus on energy consumption, big focus on water consumption. It's very important. The employees are very important for wine producers, and the neighbor is very important. So it's very important to connect and create a network between neighbors, restaurants in the area, and the producer themselves. So it's a really a nice mentality, if you ask me, and it's really important for the producer in California, and I applaud them for that. So for today, I'll finish it here. I'll say thank you for watching me. I hope you find it interesting, this first part of Californian wine episode. I will come back in a couple of days with the second part, where we will talk more about the different regions and the different counties and the different avas, what are they producing, what are they famous for, where they are from, and so on. So for today, I'll say again thank you, and have a nice Sunday, and bye bye.